All right, so we're going to dive into something today
Okay.
that a lot of people think is just like a check the box kind of thing.
Right.
But it's actually way more impactful than that.
Yeah.
We're talking about whistleblower programs.
Uh-huh.
And for this deep dive,
Okay.
we've got an episode from the new Compliance Officers Playbook podcast.
Nice.
And they really dig deep into why these programs are so crucial in today's world.
Yeah, they are.
You know, we've all seen those big scandals, like the one with Volkswagen's emissions.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, those are like prime examples of what can happen
Absolutely.
when these programs aren't working right.
Yeah, for sure. So it's interesting.
Yeah.
You know what's really interesting is that successful whistleblower programs don't just protect companies from those kinds of legal nightmares.
Right.
They actually can help build a reputation for integrity.
Yeah.
It's all about fostering trust,
Yeah. Yeah.
both within the company and with the public, too.
Absolutely.
You know what I mean?
And speaking of trust, there was this powerful quote from the podcast that really stood out to me.
Oh,
It
yeah.
said, whistleblower programs are about building a culture of openness, not just about catching bad guys.
Oh, that's good.
I don't know why, but that really reframed my thinking on this whole topic.
I can see why.
It's not about pointing fingers.
Right.
It's about creating an environment where people feel safe raising concerns.
Yeah, it's a fundamental shift, isn't it?
Totally.
I mean, it moves away from that old school fear-based approach to compliance
Yeah.
and replaces it with transparency and a genuine desire to do the right thing.
Right. Yeah.
If you're working in a place where people feel comfortable speaking up, you're much more likely to catch those issues early on,
Right.
Before they snowball into something bigger.
Where they become huge problems.
Exactly.
Yeah, and the podcast really dives into what makes a whistleblower program effective.
Yeah.
And one of the key things they emphasize is protecting whistleblowers from retaliation.
Yeah.
Because, let's be honest, nobody wants to risk their job or their reputation
Right.
for doing the right thing.
For sure.
So,
And to create that sense of safety, you need a few essential elements in place.
okay, like what?
Well, think about things like strict confidentiality,
Oh, okay.
having multiple ways to report concerns, not just one single channel,
Okay.
a rock-solid non-retaliation policy that's actually enforced,
Right.
and a system for conducting prompt and thorough investigations.
Makes sense.
It's about making sure that people have options and that they know their concerns will be taken seriously.
Okay, but let's get real for a second.
Okay.
If you were in a situation where you saw something shady going on, what would actually make you feel comfortable speaking up?
Yeah.
What would need to be in place for you to feel safe enough to raise that flag?
That's such an important question to ask yourself.
Yeah.
You see, effective programs don't just protect whistleblowers.
Right.
They empower everyone in the organization to contribute to a more ethical environment.
I see.
It fosters this sense of shared responsibility for doing the right thing,
Okay.
not just leaving it to a select few.
Right. And sometimes companies only take action after they've already been burned.
Oh, yeah, I know.
The podcast actually brought up the example of Siemens,
Uh,
which completely transformed its culture and reputation after facing some serious legal trouble.
wow.
It kind of proves that it's never too late to make a change, right?
Absolutely. It's never too late.
So we've talked about creating a culture of openness,
Right.
making people feel safe to speak up.
Yeah.
But what about the actual process of reporting concerns?
Okay.
This podcast talks about multiple reporting channels, but what does that actually look like in practice?
Well, think about it this way. Not everyone feels comfortable reporting the same way.
Okay.
Some people might prefer the anonymity of an online portal,
Sure.
while others might need the reassurance of talking to someone face-to-face,
Right.
like an HR representative or maybe even an ombudsman. The key is to offer a variety of options to make the program accessible and to cater to different needs and comfort levels.
So we've got options for reporting.
Yeah.
But even with all that, isn't a strong non-retaliation policy like the most crucial piece of the puzzle?
Oh, for sure.
I mean, what good are reporting channels if people are too scared to use them?
You're absolutely right. A non-retaliation policy is meaningless if it's not clearly communicated to everyone in the organization. And more importantly, if it's not consistently enforced.
Okay.
Think about it. If someone sees a colleague get punished for speaking up,
Right.
they're going to think twice before reporting anything themselves.
Yeah, of course.
It creates a chilling effect.
For sure.
You know what I mean?
So how does a company actually demonstrate that commitment to non-retaliation?
Yeah.
Is it just words on paper, or is there more to it?
It goes way beyond just having a policy document.
Okay.
It's about leadership, setting
Yeah.
the tone.
Mm-hmm.
making it clear that they value ethical behavior
Right.
and that they will stand behind those who come forward.
Okay.
Actions speak louder than words,
Yeah.
and employees need to see that the company is serious about protecting whistleblowers.
That makes a lot of sense, but it's not enough to just receive reports, right?
Right.
What about the investigations themselves?
Yeah.
The podcast mentioned timely investigations, but how does that actually work?
Imagine this. You've gathered the courage to report something you believe is wrong,
Yeah.
and then crickets, weeks or even months go by with no response.
Yeah.
How would that make you feel?
Not great. Probably like my concerns weren't taken seriously.
Exactly. That's why timely investigations are so critical.
Okay.
It shows that the organization values the input of the whistleblower and is serious about addressing the issue.
Okay.
It also helps to prevent the problem from festering and potentially causing further harm.
So we've talked about reporting channels,
Right, yeah.
non-retaliation, and investigations. But the podcast also highlighted the importance of training and awareness.
Oh, yeah.
I have to admit, I haven't thought much about that aspect before.
It's often overlooked, but it's really crucial.
Okay.
Employees need to understand how the program works, why it's important, and how to effectively report misconduct.
Okay.
They need to know their rights and responsibilities.
But wouldn't that create a culture of suspicion? Like everyone's constantly looking over their shoulders,
Yeah,
waiting for someone to slip up.
that's a valid concern, and it's something organizations need to be mindful of.
Yeah.
The goal isn't to create an environment of fear and distrust.
Right.
It's about empowering employees to be active participants in maintaining ethical standards.
Okay.
It's about promoting a culture of integrity where everyone feels comfortable speaking up, not just about wrongdoing, but also about potential risks or areas for improvement.
So it's less about catching bad guys and more about fostering a sense of collective responsibility for doing the right thing.
Exactly. And it all starts with creating a culture where people feel safe, supported, and empowered to speak up.
You know, when we think about whistleblowers,
Yeah.
we often think about these like big headline-grabbing cases.
Right, those big scandals.
Yeah.
Oh.
But the reality is that a whistleblower program
Yeah.
can have a huge impact on any organization,
Right.
big or small.
Absolutely.
It's not just about avoiding those massive scandals. It's about creating a culture where everyone feels empowered to speak up, even about those like seemingly small things.
That's a really important point.
Right.
You know, it's not just about catching major fraud or misconduct. It's about encouraging people to raise concerns about anything that seems off.
Okay.
Even if it's just a gut feeling or a question about whether something is being handled properly.
So it's about shifting the mindset
Yeah.
from like, well, that's not my problem,
Right.
to, hey, maybe I should say something about this. Exactly. It's about creating a sense of collective ownership over the company's ethical standards.
Okay.
It's about everyone feeling responsible for ensuring that things are being done the right way.
And one of the things the podcast really hammered home was the importance of confidentiality.
Oh, absolutely.
People need to know that they can report their concerns without fear
Right.
of their identity being revealed.
Yeah.
Or even worse, facing some kind of backlash.
Confidentiality is key.
Yeah.
It's a cornerstone of any effective whistleblower program.
Right.
It's about building trust and giving people the confidence to come forward
Mm-hmm.
without feeling that they're putting their jobs or their reputations on the line.
But what happens if someone feels like they can't report through official channels? Like, what if they don't trust the internal system or they're worried about their anonymity? Is it ever okay to bypass those channels?
Oh, that's a tough one.
Yeah.
And go straight to the media, for example. That's a really tough question, you know?
There's no easy answer.
Right.
And every situation is different.
Of course.
Ideally, you want to encourage people to use the internal reporting channels first. But there are certainly situations where going outside the organization might be the only option.
Okay. So like when?
Yeah. For example, if there's a clear and imminent danger to public safety,
Okay.
or if there's reason to believe that the internal channels won't be effective.
So it's not a black and white issue.
Not at all.
There are definitely shades of gray.
Exactly. And it's important for organizations to be aware of that
Yeah.
and to create a system that is as flexible and responsive as possible to address those gray areas.
Okay. So let's say someone decides to make a report.
Okay.
What happens next?
Yeah.
How does the investigation process actually work?
Well, first of all, it's important to have a clear and transparent process in place.
Okay.
Employees should know who is responsible for conducting investigations, what the timeline is,
Right.
and what they can expect to happen.
So it's about managing expectations. Yes.
And making sure that people feel like the process is fair and impartial.
Absolutely. And it's also important to ensure that the investigators are properly trained and equipped to handle these types of cases.
Yeah.
These are sensitive matters
Of course.
that require a high level of discretion and professionalism.
But what about the whistleblower themselves?
Yeah.
Do they get any feedback or updates throughout the investigation process?
Ideally, yes. It's important to keep the whistleblower informed about the progress of the investigation, even if you can't share all the details.
Right.
Just letting them know that their report is being taken seriously and that the investigation is moving forward can go a long way in building trust and ensuring their cooperation.
So it's about communication and transparency.
Yes.
Even if there are limits to what you can share.
Exactly. It's about striking that balance between protecting the integrity of the investigation and keeping the whistleblower informed and engaged.
Now, the podcast also touched on the role of leadership.
In creating a culture where speaking up is encouraged and valued, what are some concrete things that leaders can do to foster that kind of environment?
One of the most important things is to lead by example.
Okay.
Leaders need to demonstrate through their actions that they are committed to ethical behavior and that they will not tolerate any form of retaliation against those who speak up.
So it's not enough to just talk the talk.
Nope.
You have to walk the walk.
Absolutely. Actions speak louder than words.
Yeah.
And employees are much more likely to trust a system that they see being upheld and enforced by leadership.
Are there any other tangible steps that leaders can take to show their support for the program?
Sure. There are a lot of things they can do.
Okay.
They can make sure that the program is adequately resourced, that the investigators have the authority and independence they need to do their jobs properly,
Okay.
and that there are clear and effective channels for reporting concerns.
Okay.
They can also publicly acknowledge and thank employees who come forward.
Right.
And they can celebrate successes in the program,
Oh, wow.
like instances where reports led to positive changes within the organization.
So it's about making the program visible.
Yeah.
And creating a sense that it's a valued part of the company's culture.
Exactly. It's about making it clear that speaking up is not just tolerated.
Right.
It's encouraged and expected.
But what about those who are skeptical? What if someone says, look, I've been in this industry for years, and these programs are just a way for companies to cover their butts.
Right.
They don't actually care about doing the right thing.
Yeah, I hear that.
How would you respond to that?
I understand the skepticism. There have been plenty of cases where companies have paid lip service to ethics and compliance while turning a blind eye to wrongdoing. But I think it's important to remember that there are also plenty of companies out there that are genuinely committed to doing the right thing.
Okay.
And that see whistleblower programs as a vital part of that commitment.
So it's about looking beyond the cynical view.
Yeah.
And acknowledging that there are companies out there that are trying to do things differently.
Exactly. And it's about holding those companies accountable.
Okay.
And making sure that their actions match their words. Ultimately, the success of a whistleblower program depends on a culture of trust and transparency.
Right.
Employees need to believe that their concerns will be taken seriously.
Yeah.
And that they will be protected from retaliation.
That makes sense, but it's not just about the company, right? What about the individuals themselves? What role do they play in creating a culture of ethical behavior?
Well, I think it starts with a sense of personal responsibility.
Okay.
Each of us has a role to play in upholding ethical standards, whether that's in our workplaces, our communities, or our personal lives.
Right.
It's about having the courage to speak up when we see something that's wrong.
Yeah.
And doing our part to create a more just and equitable world.
So it's not just about whistleblowers. It's about everyone being willing to stand up for what they believe in.
Exactly. It's about creating a culture where everyone feels empowered to be a force for good.
Okay, so we've talked about the importance of confidentiality.
Yeah.
The role of leadership. And the need for a clear and transparent investigation process.
Right.
But what about the aftermath? What happens after an investigation is concluded?
Yeah.
How does a company address any wrongdoing that's uncovered?
Yeah.
And how do they prevent similar issues from happening again?
That's a critical part of the process.
Yeah.
First and foremost, the company needs to take appropriate action to address any wrongdoing that's been identified.
Right.
This might involve disciplinary action against individuals, changes to policies or procedures,
Oh, okay.
or even restitution to those who have been harmed.
So it's about taking concrete steps to rectify the situation and make things right.
Exactly. And it's also about learning from the experience and using it as an opportunity to improve the company's ethics and compliance program.
But what if the investigation finds that the whistleblower's concerns were unfounded?
Okay.
How does the company handle that situation?
Well, it's important to remember that not every report will lead to a finding of wrongdoing.
Right.
Sometimes there might be a misunderstanding or a misinterpretation of events.
Yeah.
But even in those cases, it's important to treat the whistleblower with respect
Okay.
and to thank them for coming forward.
So it's about recognizing that even if their concerns weren't substantiated,
Yeah.
they still had the courage to speak up.
Right.
And that deserves to be acknowledged.
Exactly. And it's also important to use those instances as learning opportunities.
Okay. How so?
Well, if there was a misunderstanding, why did it happen?
Right.
Were there any communication breakdowns or gaps in training that need to be addressed?
So it's about constantly evaluating and refining the program
Yeah.
to make sure it's as effective as possible.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's about creating a culture of continuous improvement
Oh.
where the company is always striving to do better and to create a more ethical and transparent environment. It's interesting
Yeah.
because we often think about whistleblower programs as a reactive measure,
Right, right.
like, something you put in place to deal with problems after they've already happened.
Yeah.
But what we've been talking about is that they can actually be
Right.
a proactive force for positive change.
Right. And that's what I've been picking up on, too.
Yeah.
It's like when you have a robust whistleblower program in place, it kind of sends this powerful message
It does.
that ethical behavior isn't just a nice to have. It's like
Yeah.
this core value
Yeah.
that's like embedded in everything the company does.
For sure. And it can shift the entire culture of a company.
Yeah. And like we were talking about before, the Siemens example from the podcast,
Yeah.
it really stuck with me. They went from facing these like major legal consequences
Yeah.
to becoming a model for ethical conduct.
It's amazing.
It really shows that potential
It does.
for transformation
It really
that
does.
these programs have.
Absolutely. It proves that it's never too late to change course
Right.
and build a better future,
Yeah.
even if a company has made some serious mistakes in the past.
It's about owning it, right?
It is.
And acknowledging those mistakes and
Yeah.
making a real commitment
Right.
to doing things differently moving forward.
Totally. And that commitment has to come from the top down.
Yeah, like leadership really needs to set the tone
Absolutely.
and make it clear that they don't just value ethical behavior,
Right.
but that they're willing to support those who have the courage to speak up even when it's difficult.
They got to walk the walk,
Yeah, exactly. Not just
But
talk the talk.
Actions speak louder than words,
They do.
They have to demonstrate through their actions that they take ethical conduct seriously.
Uh-huh.
And they need to be willing to hold themselves and others accountable,
Okay.
even if it means facing some uncomfortable truths.
So let's bring it back to our listener for a minute.
Okay.
If you were to take a look at the whistleblower program
Yeah.
in your own organization,
Uh-huh.
what would you be looking for?
Good question.
Yeah, what would be like the key indicators
Yeah.
that it's truly fostering that culture of openness and trust?
Think about it this way. If you were in a situation where you saw something wrong, would you feel comfortable speaking up?
Okay.
Would you trust that your concerns would be taken seriously? Would you believe that you would be protected from retaliation?
Right.
Those are the litmus tests of an effective program.
Yeah, because ultimately we all have this responsibility to
You surely do.
contribute to creating these ethical workplaces, right?
Right.
It's not just about having the program in place. It's
Yeah.
about each of us,
Uh-huh.
from the CEO to the entry-level employee,
Yeah.
feeling empowered to speak up
Right.
and make a difference.
Building a culture of integrity is a collective effort.
Yeah.
It's about each of us taking ownership
Mm.
and doing our part to create a more ethical and transparent world.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, what's the key takeaway you want our listeners to walk away with?
I think the biggest takeaway is this. Don't underestimate the power of speaking up. You don't have to be a whistleblower to be a force for good.
Yeah.
Sometimes the most courageous act is simply saying, hey, this doesn't seem right.
Right.
That simple act can spark a conversation, raise awareness, and ultimately lead to positive change.
That's a great point to end on.
Yeah.
So to our listeners, keep asking those tough questions.
Keep pushing.
Keep pushing for positive change. And remember,
Yeah.
you have a voice and it matters.